Hello and thanks for joining us again on Agenda 2030. I am Toyin Kamyang John. I hope your week has been great. In continuation of our series of interviews with some of the management staff in the Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on SDGs, on the implementation efforts of the federal government and other stakeholders, we will on this episode be speaking to Mr. Yahaya Hamza, the head of sectors in the office. Mr. Hamza will be taking us through some of the practical interventions, policies and programs the Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on SDGs in collaboration with other stakeholders, organizations, individuals in the general quest to ensure the realization of the set goals and targets. Okay, so the implementation of the SDGs requires that all stakeholders are brought on board. Now, what is the office doing to ensure the effective collaboration with everyone?
Expectedly, for you to succeed in every assignment you handle, it is very important that you plan. From that position of planning and getting ready in terms of key into the global agenda, in terms of national stakeholder, in terms of subnational stakeholder engagement, in terms of engagement of all citizens of Nigeria. So the office was very proactive. At the end of the millennium, 2015, the office prepared an endpoint report which clearly showcased the achievements, challenges, lessons learned, and way forward with the SDGs as the new successor global agenda that replaces the Millennium Development Goals. Stemming from that, it was closely followed by working together with partners. We developed the country transition strategy. So the country transition strategy essentially highlighted 7 thematic areas within which the issue of stakeholder engagement comes in. These thematic areas, as highlighted and articulated in the document by all stakeholders that were involved: OSAP SDGs, UNDP, DFID UK, the federal MDS, and some civil society. That was back in 2016. The 7 thematic areas were the institutional framework, communications framework, financing, human resource, partnerships, M&E, and legal and regulatory framework. So the partnership framework is very robust to the same extent that other 6 thematic areas are. In terms of stakeholder engagement, broadly, it classifies the stakeholders into the public sector stakeholder, the private sector stakeholder, the donors has stakeholders, the civil society has stakeholders, and all the 36 states and the LGS as stakeholders. And of course, every citizen of Nigeria as a stakeholder, just like every citizen of the 193 member nations that signed on to the new development agenda as stakeholders. So, what have we done in terms of institutions and structures towards achieving the engagement of these respective categories of stakeholders? At the top, the highest policy supervision body is the Presidential Council on the Assessment and Monitoring of the SDGs, which is chaired by the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. The membership of that council includes, like I said, the chair of it, ministers and head of agencies that are very strategic and core to the attainment of the SDGs. Every geopolitical zone, you have a governor representing the geopolitical zones. You have a representative from the Nigeria Governors Forum. You have a representative from the ALGON. You have the international development partners. You also have the representative of the civil society. So this is the membership of this council on the SDGs. The SDGs as an office, through the senior special assistant to the president on the SDGs, also attends on invitation the National Economic Council, where issues that affect policy and plans and implementations of programs that would also have to do with the subnational level of governance. So we have, again, at the federal level, the Interministerial Coordinating Committee, which is chaired by OSAP SDGs. The sectors unit that I happen to head coordinates these activities on behalf of the office. The Interministerial Coordinating Committee has membership cutting across all the ministries, departments, and agencies of the Federation. It meets quarterly to learn lessons, to discuss progress, and to share knowledge. And in addition to these two, we have the Donors and Partners Forum. The Donors Forum has also been inaugurated. This was done by the acting president since 2017. We have the Civil Society Strategy Group for the SDGs, which is also being inaugurated. We have the Private Sector Advisory Group, which was chaired by the chairman of the Sahara Group, Mr. Tony Cole, but because he has veered into politics now, the secretariat is held by PricewaterhouseCoopers for now. So these are some of the structures and mechanisms that are put in place to ensure that we have stakeholder broadly buying into the agenda. In addition, a very important party to whatever we do is the communications. The SDG platform on communications, especially the Fresh News TV program and the quarterly publications of the Agenda 2030 has been very helpful, because as you know, mass media reaches out to a very large audience. So the audience, I'm sure, the public beyond the shores of Nigeria must have seen some of these programs on the national television. I think it's every Thursday of every week. And then this was the first edition of this magazine. This was the second edition of the magazine, the third, and the fourth. So the media has been a very, very robust and effective partner in terms of stakeholder information, awareness creation, sensitization, and citizens' engagement.
Now, one of the limitations of the MDGs implementation was lack of buy-in from all. How well have you say the office has been able to mainstream the SDGs into the developmental plans of both the national and subnational levels?
You see, there must have been other country experiences in terms of domesticating global development agenda. But for most of us involved in the MDGs and SDGs, the MDGs was a first country experience of its kind. And some of the quick lessons to learn from the MDGs. You see, the MDGs are almost like the SDGs, came in when the country was transiting from the military government to a democratic government. And there you are with a lot of challenges. There you are with a global program that has to be domesticated into a government that for years has been a military type of governance into a democracy. And that was during the time of President Olusegun Obasanjo. So the president did well, though the millennium, as the name implies, ought to start, as a country, we ought to have started rolling out these programs from 2000. But you see, as a country, the office was established in 2005, following the Paris Club negotiations and the debt relief the country had from the Paris Club of Debtors. So by 2006, finances were available and the necessary structures were established. But a landmark achievement is the establishment of the Office of the Senior Special Assistant under the direct supervision of Mr. President. And then the fact that certain sum on annual basis, which was very significant, was dedicated as agreed with the Paris Club of Debtors to the attainment of the MDGs in Nigeria. I have taken you a little back to history so that you'll understand that we didn't properly started the implementation of the MDGs from the baseline year of 2000. We started from around 2005, but real activities commenced from 2006. So if you count it from that time to the end of 2015, vis-a-vis what we were able to do as a nation, we did fairly well. And let me also put it on record that the pioneer SSAP, that's the Senior Special Assistant to the President on the MDGs, who incidentally is now the Deputy Secretary General to the UN Secretary General, Ajay Amina Muhammad, laid very solid foundations. And it is because of that that the time lost notwithstanding, we still measurably did fairly well when compared side by side with other nations. Because yes, it could be argued that in a number of targets, we did not actually achieve them. But when you look at the baseline that was used for the MDGs, some from 1999, some from 2000, when you look at the baseline, and at the end of 2015, where we were in terms of progress, we made a good number of progress in some of the targets, although we did not achieve most of the targets. But those targets that were very important, like extreme hunger, the country, the office, and by extension Nigeria, received Food and Agriculture Award for meeting up with the targets of the MDGs. The maternal-mortality ratio, the baseline at the start of the MDGs, stood at about 1,000 deaths per 100,000 live births. That is the MMR, maternal mortality ratio. But at the end of the millennium, 2015, it dropped to somewhere less than 300 deaths per 100,000 live births. The same thing with the under 5 mortality. There was tremendous progress when compared with the endpoint of 89 per 1,000 live births as compared to a baseline of almost 300 to 500. So, equally, when you look at the parity ratio in terms of school enrollment between the girl child and the boys, prior to the MDGs, there was a huge gap. But at the end of the millennium, the parity ratio was 1:1. So what again was a good takeaway from the MDGs? We had some good practices that we took, that we retained with the SDGs from the MDGs era. This office was part of the things that other countries copied from Nigeria. Having an office under the supervision of Mr. President, domiciled directly under the supervision of Mr. President, as I said, was a good practice. There were other nations, both in Africa and outside Africa, who copied that. In the MDGs era, the conditional grant scheme was also established, working closely with the Millennium Institute to try to increase the level of investment at the subnational level on those areas that will have direct impact on the lives of a greater number of Nigerians. Issues that has to do with health, education, water, sanitation were the focus. So the CGS was also a good practice, which we retain under the SDGs. So some of these institutions I mentioned earlier, like the various, the Interministerial Coordinating Committee, the Presidential Monitoring Council, they were also part of the best practices of the MDGs that we took forward. And most importantly, the Endpoint 2015 report clearly highlights the areas where lessons were learned, the challenges, and next steps forward. So, and that document too was one of the good practices that we took forward in whatever we are doing with the SDGs. Part of the success stories of best practices, one is the fact that we try to leverage on the technical expertise of the UN office in the country and other partners. Equally, a new innovation around the SDGs is the private sector group. Also, there are quite a number of different innovations around the implementation of the SDGs, especially when you look at the level of participation. Unlike the MDGs, the citizens appear to be much more aware and positioned, because in the MDGs era, every other stakeholder was waiting for what the government would do. But now you have a lot of players who are doing what they need to do. And of course, as a government, as an office, the attainment of the SDGs, or how well the country will do at the end of the day, or how well we do as a country periodically as we assess our performance, does not rely exclusively on what we do in the office. It is the total sum of all the activities across the board, from the public sector to the private sector to the civil society and to the citizens. So, a very commendable diversion from what was witnessed with the MDGs is the fact that you have a lot of participation, broad-based participation, not waiting necessarily for what the government does. That is very important, because there are a number of people who are working in the field towards achieving the SDGs. Also, the SDGs is broad-based, so it captures most of the concerns and issues of governments, whether at the national, state, or at the community level. So, but essentially, drawing from the mandate of this office, the mandate of this office is predicated on four broad areas. One, strategic direction, planning, and coordination. So we must provide, which we are providing, strategic direction, planning, and coordination. Two, representation, advocacy, and partnership development, which I've also touched on earlier in the course of the questions that you tabled. Resource mobilization and management, which we're also working on, but within the confines of the finances of the public sector, and then working with the private sector in terms of galvanizing their individual efforts and also seeing how they'll pool their resources and also pool their corporate social responsibilities towards targeting some of these interventions that will be impactful on the lives of a greater number of the citizens of this country, because that is what's at the core of the SDGs. And then the fourth of the mandate is, of course, monitoring, evaluation, documentation, and reporting. So I presented this mandate so that you will understand it in the context of the mainstreaming effort. Within the first mandate of strategic direction, planning, and coordination, it behoves on this office and the leadership of this office, and as significantly demonstrated by Her Excellency Princess Adejoke Orelope Adefulere, to take leadership in terms of strategic direction. That, as earlier said, was provided by this document, a country transition strategy, which was activated with an action plan. And as we tarry in the implementation of the SDGs, and as contained in this document, we have the phasing of the SDGs. We have the first phase from 2016 to 2020, the second phase 2021 to 2025, and the third phase 2026 to 2030. So within the context of the first phase implementation, what we desire to achieve nationally and subnationally is to be able to create enough awareness and sensitization, to be able to identify, which we have, existing capacity and institutional gaps, and which we are already approaching scientifically. Already we have had sessions on capacity imperatives at the national and subnational level. We are also engaging states on advocacy and mainstreaming. But we started with the national mainstreaming, which was capturing the essence or the essential pillars of the SDGs into the matrix of the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, which is a midterm strategic plan, or the development plan, so to say, that we have as a country.
Nigeria will continue to support the United Nations in all its efforts, including the attainment of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I thank you.
Agenda 2030, showing on this channel. Agenda 2030, leaving no one behind.
And that's our package for the week. Remember, you can always watch this program and other episodes by subscribing to our YouTube channels on youtube.com/Fresh News TV and youtube.com/Agenda 2030 TV. You can also watch the program live on Facebook. Just log on to www.facebook.com/Fresh News NG and www.facebook.com/Agenda 2030 TV. Follow us on all our social media platforms at Agenda 2030 TV on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Remember to drop your comments and share with your contacts. Do use the hashtag Agenda 2030 and hashtag Agenda 2030 TV. Thank you very much for being part of the program this week. We will see you again next week. I am Toyin Kamyang John.